Well, time now for The View, looking at all the latest opinions and talking points in today's newspapers and news websites. And the National Health Service is in a state of crisis. And don't rely on Sajid Javid to fix it. That's the message from Andy Cooper, writing in The Guardian. Matt Hancock may have been the 21st century's worst health secretary, he says, but his replacement will now be confronted by the real consequences of the austerity policies that he's consistently supported. Going to be talking about that as well later on. In The Times, William Hague says as soon as things get back to something like normality, Boris Johnson should carry out a proper cabinet reshuffle to refresh the talent pool and see off backbench dissent. Don't laugh, we're all on camera nowadays, says Hugo Rifkin in The Times. The CCTV that Matt Hancock failed to notice in his office is part of an unsettling new normal we'll struggle to reverse. Polly Toynbee, writing in The Guardian, says, considering the Batley and Spen by-election campaign turning unexpectedly vicious and abusive, that we should beware of the dangers of vilifying politicians. In The Eye, Mark Wallace claims Sir Keir Starmer has lost control of the narrative and needs to make a vocal personal stand for the values of democracy and decency ahead of Thursday's by-election. Anne-Elisabeth Moutet in the Daily Telegraph says President Macron's disastrous showing in the French regional elections has left him a lame duck and a threat to Britain. Blower's cartoon shows Mr. Macron in full Napoleonic pose in the style of the famous David painting, but instead of a horse, he's astride a lame duck. And with just hours to go until the big match, Simon Cooper, writing in the Financial Times, claims that England's one-sided football rival with Germany has lost its bite, with the Germans going from bogeyman to guest trapped in the middle of an embarrassing domestic dispute. Perhaps not an opinion widely held amongst England fans, Matt takes a rather different view in his pocket cartoon on the front of the Telegraph. I'm not coming into the office today, I'm WFH, watching football at home is the caption. Well, joining me today to look through those are the Chief Political Commentator on Foreign Affairs for the Financial Times, Philip Stevens, and the Deputy Director of Bright Blue, Nikita Malik. Very nice indeed to see you. Philip Stevens, what do you reckon? Is Macron a lame duck, and is he going to lash out at Britain in his remaining time before the elections next year?
Well, look, it's clear that at the provincial elections in France, Macron did badly. His En Marche party did very badly. But it's also clear that the sort of traditional right in France has come back somewhat. It's been in complete disarray. So there is now a possibility that instead of facing Marine Le Pen in a second round next year of the presidential election, Macron could face a more conventional right-wing opponent, and that would be harder. That's the theory. There's a huge caveat, though, on this, which is only 35% of French voters actually turned out on Sunday. I mean, basically, the abstention rate showed a complete lack of interest. So drawing conclusions from a presidential election, the turnout's going to be close to twice that. So drawing conclusions a year before that election about the result of the election, we don't know who the candidate of the right will be anyway, apart from Le Pen's challenge. So I think it's a bit early. And as for this will turn Macron, make Macron even more difficult for Britain, I think, it's in the Telegraph. I think that says it all.
I have to say, though, someone not a Telegraph reader did say to me at the weekend that Macron, he's a nasty little man, Nikita. I mean, he does seem to be going out of his way to tweak Britain's nose to a certain extent, isn't he?
Yes, I think it's broadly illustrated in this article too, that there's this space that is needed for an EU leader. And I think Macron is trying to position himself as that, especially with Merkel's decline. And I think I agree. It is very early to understand the dynamics nationally. And broadly, polls do show support for Macron, but his immediate reaction to kind of go on Twitter and have a success list of what he's achieved and what he plans to achieve does show perhaps some interest on his end to show that he is a front runner and can fill this gap and can perhaps be hard on the UK with some of the kind of decisions he's made on trade with Britain going forwards as well. So it seems that there's a gap here that he's very keen to fill. Whether he does that both on a national and an EU level remains to be seen, and it is early days still.
What do you make of, Nikita, of Polly Toynbee's column? I mean, she's talking about the very unpleasant things, intimidation, egg throwing, and all the rest that's gone on in Batley and Spen. And she, there's a bit of a mea culpa there. She says that we should accept, whether we agree with them or not, that most people involved in politics are exposing themselves and are well-intentioned. Is that a timely intervention, or do you think they're just all a bag of crooks and deserve what they get?
It's a tough one, isn't it? Especially now with public opinion on politicians and their actions and their integrity. It is a very tough environment. But I think with the Batley election in particular, it is one that is very close to people's hearts because of course, what happened with Jo Cox. And what we see here with Labour in particular is a gap that could perhaps be filled by extreme factions and gives an opportunity for a Tory lead here, something that will, of course, have huge ramifications for Keir Starmer. I mean, we need to still understand, as is covered in this article, what Keir Starmer's priorities are, what his positioning is, and what the repercussions will be if this turns out to be another election where Labour fails. So I think it's a very timely intervention, particularly given public attitudes at the moment towards British politicians and the decisions that they're making, but they are nonetheless human, and we have to be very careful with the kind of tactics that are being used on both sides against the politicians who are running in for this very important seat.
I mean, Philip, it's a difficult one, isn't it? As a commentator, when does criticism, justified comment, turn into abuse that might egg people on to not be very pleasant?
Well, I basically share Polly's view. I mean, I remember when I worked at Westminster for several years, sort of cheek by jowl with the politicians, I always took the view that the vast majority were decent people trying to do the right thing from all parties. There are always a few. I think if you look at Batley and Spen, I think when you look at the campaign run by supporters of George Galloway, the maverick, I think he now runs for the Workers' Party, which is basically the sort of dynamic in this election is Galloway's attempt to undercut the Labour vote by mobilising some Muslims against Labour. I think, people I've spoken to who've been up there say it's one of the nastiest elections they've seen. A lot of the attacks on the Labour Party, on Jo Cox's sister, and on Kim Ledbetter. And I think, this is the exception rather than the rule. By-elections are always rough. I think this is a particularly nasty one. And I don't actually think it's representative of British politics as a whole.
And I suspect, Nikita, you may be a little bit detached on this, but we have got this football match this afternoon between England and Germany. What did you make of the argument that Simon Cooper, who follows football very closely for the Financial Times, wrote a book called Soccernomics, makes that actually all this kind of remember the war stuff is really out of date, and it's not the way that most English people now look at Germany. What do you make of that?
It's funny you say that I'm detached. I love football, so I think it's going to be a very interesting match. And I actually disagree a little bit with this article. I think England has, a fighting chance to actually, bring this home. They have a very good team, and we see particularly with the game yesterday, we have some very surprising outcomes. You have France, who we thought would be one of the front runners, out of the game now. So I think it links back to the cartoon that we looked at earlier. There are going to be a lot of people who are going to be watching this match tonight. The excitement of the game, it is fresh, it is novel, despite some of the historical connotations that are trying to be kind of brought up. I think people are very keen for us to win tonight, and whether they'll be watching football from home or from the pub, I think this is a very, very interesting and important match, and an exciting one too.
What do you think, Philip? I mean, do you think the two world wars and one World Cup stuff still works?
I think Simon's right that some of the energy has gone out of that. We don't often see, as I remember, 20 years ago, tabloid pictures of the sort of German Wehrmacht marching down Whitehall. But I do actually think that we have a curious relationship with Germany, which is a combination of sort of envy and fear. And the envy is because Germany's done so well economically, and fear because it's the big country in Europe and because of the history. And, even Boris Johnson, we saw during the referendum campaign, likened, the EU to the German attempt to take over Europe under Adolf Hitler. You still get that, a strain of that on the conservative backbenches and certainly in UKIP. So I think the energy's gone out of it. I mean, there's still quite a lot of tabloid banter on both sides. You get it built in the German tabloid, the newspaper. But I think there is still an unease about our relationship. And perhaps we'll see that when Angela Merkel comes over on Friday to meet Boris Johnson at Chequers. I think Boris Johnson expects to charm her into taking a softer line on the Irish Protocol, part of the Brexit agreement. I think he'll be told rather firmly by Angela Merkel that actually we signed an agreement, Britain signed an agreement, the UK signed an agreement, and it's got to live up to that.
Well, perhaps the result will matter to Angela Merkel and shape her attitude. We know she follows football closely, as does Nikita. Apologies for any assumptions about your interest in the game. You put me right on that. Thank you both very much indeed. This is All Out Politics. Coming up next,